Hello mates! So I wanted to talk you through how I converted this pretty much stock NB MX-5 Miata for Assetto Corsa into my real world NB track car. Obviously, it started with a whole lot of Blender, which is the 3D modeling software. I have zero prior experience with this software, but I just kind of got stuck into it, practiced enough until I kind of started to work out how to do everything. I started with something simple like extending the bumper, the sort of chin section of the bumper, which meets up with my splitter, which you can see I have modeled here. I created the splitter in Blender, which was not easy because I'm not familiar with creating things. Moving on from the splitter was the side skirts. Thankfully this stuff's fairly simple, it's generally just rectangular geometry. Really relatively easy to replicate the real world. You may see there every now and again I'll pop up the real picture to kind of compare against as I go. This was a slightly harder section, the rear kind of barge boards that sit in front of the rear wheels. They've got some curves and kind of multiple curves on a single piece, which I did not have any idea how to model in Blender. But once one side skirt was mostly done, I duplicated it over to the other side and moved onto the fender cutouts that I've got on my car. Again, not easy because I needed to find some way to cut the fenders but keep them still looking okay. As soon as you cut the meshes, they kind of go all ugly and janky and the model doesn't look nice and smooth, so it took me a fair few goes at this to try and get it right and get the model looking okay. In the end it's not perfect, but it does look pretty darn cool. I had to also tuck in the wheel arch area on the inside so that it didn't expose because I'd carved away the fenders. Moved on, I did some modifications to both the front headlights and the rear tail lights. Both of those had the OEM kind of body paint color mesh, which I needed to sort of hide or modify, so I did a bit of work there to clean those up. For side mirrors, I went back to Fusion 360, which I do have some knowledge of how to use to model up kind of a rough idea of my side mirrors, and then imported that into Blender. Thankfully that made things easier because I kind of knew how to use Fusion. I was able to import my side mirrors, and then I just had to resize the mirror mesh, which actually displays the mirror image in game for both side mirrors. So I just took the original mesh shape, which you can see looks like the original MX-5's door mirror, and resized it to suit my mirrors. From there it was the splitter supports. These were not too hard, just some cylinders which I shrunk and resized until I got sort of the right idea. I actually played with these a few times to get the sort of dimensions exactly how I wanted them and positioned correctly. After the splitter supports, I moved over to the steering wheel where I retextured it. As you can see here, this took a bit of practice. I googled an image of the OMP steering wheel and imported that in, and then I spent a while trying to find a steering wheel that was kind of the same shape. I wasn't really up to the challenge of trying to model my own steering wheel, but thankfully I found one that was kind of similar. I then needed to learn how to retexture a mesh, which is something I had zero experience in doing and had no idea how to do. But, you know, practice and Googling and watching YouTube videos, you eventually work out how to do it. And as you can see here, I worked out how to do the remesh of the steering wheel. In the end, it turned out okay, not perfect, but pretty darn cool anyway. And it was, you know, a little bit tedious, but it was great fun to get something that looked really cool in the end. After the steering wheel, I redid some work on the bumper and then quickly moved on to the roof, and this was easily the scariest part for me. I had zero idea how to create this fastback roof. I had, you know, I could manipulate existing models a little bit to kind of get them to look like my car, but to be able to create the whole fastback roof, which was such a curved shape, had so many different shapes, so many different curves to it, very hard to replicate. So I decided to try and create a kind of rough idea in Fusion 360. Again, it wasn't perfect, so I imported it into Blender, put it on the car, and then started to just massage and slowly pulled the mesh out until I kind of got a shape that's okay. It's not perfect by a long way, but it kind of looks okay. and I was able to find an OEM hardtop, so I at least could use that for the sort of front section of the Fastback, which is an OEM shape anyway. It does match that sort of OEM hardtop shape. So that was really good, and then I was able to match the roof to the hardtop, and it all in the end turned out okay. I did need to do a lot of cleaning up on the mesh for the Fastback that I'd imported from Fusion. It was a bit complex, the shapes weren't perfect, it was a lot of time spent just at all the different sort of camera angles trying to get the mesh to be smooth but match the body lines. Eventually I kind of got there and I was able to match it up with the OEM hardtop shape. Once the mesh was mostly okay, I was able to duplicate it, so one half to the other. Again, a little bit of cleanup. From there, it was time to shape out the rear window, cut that into the roof, and we had a roof that was looking pretty good. Obviously, I tried to match the size and scale and position of the window with my real-world car. So again, popped out the images to try and get it to sort of look the same. Lastly was a bit of cleanup of the roof. There was multiple sections that all needed to be merged. And then it was on to all of the data. I had to modify all of the information about the car: aero, suspension, tires, gearbox, diff ratio, engine power, turbocharger. All of this sort of stuff needed manipulation. It's all just data files. It wasn't as simple as what you kind of might see here. I actually took it into game a number of times, went back and forth trying to replicate the data I'd created with my actual lap times to try and replicate the real thing. In the end, the result was strikingly very similar to the pictures that you can see here. One thing I didn't mention is I did also obviously create the wing. Unfortunately, I didn't have video footage of that, but the end result, as you can see, is pretty good. I'm pretty chuffed. Obviously, things aren't exactly perfect. For example, the texturing on the roof doesn't have that kind of same shininess as the rest of the body. I don't quite know why. I'm not very good with this sort of thing. I was even able to update the textures for the tires to kind of look like the AO50 tires that I run, although for some reason, annoyingly, the left-hand side tires run backwards. Don't tell anyone I told you that. Another cool thing was I was able to import the 3D model for the fender vents that I created into Blender, and so they are literally the exact same 3D model that I used in real life. Similarly, the front badge of the Flaming Skull, which is actually part of the Offspring band, if you weren't aware, that was again an import from Fusion 360. And that is my car, all completed. Of course, if you're interested in downloading it, you know what to do. There's a link in the description. Thank you very much for watching.